Hello, everyone. Good morning and or good afternoon, depending on where you are dialing in from. We're excited to share this presentation with you today and appreciate your joining us. Welcome to the quiet erosion of death data, why the limited access death master file can no longer be trusted. The file that insurers have relied upon for decades now captures only 16% of US deaths and regularly reports false positives, and more recently contains interesting irregularities that we can discuss later in the presentation. It takes a special person to care about this, and we appreciate you taking the time to join us, as I mentioned. At Berwyn Group, we get particularly excited about working behind the scenes inside the machinery of the insurance industry to help facilitate the great wealth transfer that we are just now at the doorstep of, where tens of trillions of dollars that is tied up in life insurance policies and annuities will be changing hands, and the work that we do helps facilitate that. This is a thought leadership conversation. It is not a product presentation. We are recording this, and at the end, we will have an opportunity for some Q&A. It is my great pleasure now, though, to introduce you to this all-star panel that is joining me, and I'm going to let them both introduce themselves. We have Dick Weber, who is the president of Ethical Edge Incorporated, and Ken Catrone, who is the insurance certified supervising examiner at the Connecticut Insurance Department. Dick, if you wouldn't mind, please introduce yourself.
Sure, Lynn, thank you. This is my 60th year in the industry. Yes, I was just a mere child when I joined the industry, half of which has been as an agent, but the second half as a fee-only insurance expert. We don't sell products. We don't receive commissions. I have trademarked the term of art insurance fiduciary, and that's a responsibility to my clients that I take very seriously. Something that I find clients especially find very important to them. And typically the clients don't want to know all that much about insurance. They want to know, I know what is going to be important to them, applying my knowledge to their circumstances. About a third of my time is spent as a life insurance consumer advocate. I'm a co-founder of the Life Insurance Consumer Advocacy Center in California, nicknamed LICAC. I am a consumer representative to both the NAIC and the Insurance Compact, and I am on the CFP Board of Standards Standards Resource Commission. So that's what I've been doing lately.
Thank you very much, Dick, and we appreciate you joining us today. Ken, would you please introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Ken Catrone. I'm in financial analysis division of the Connecticut Insurance Department, where my role is to oversee the solvency of our Connecticut domestic life and property and casualty insurers. I've been a regulator for nearly 15 years now. And our main obligation is to protect policyholders, make sure insurers are meeting their obligations, and that the insurer stays solvent.
Thank you very much, Ken, and thank you again, Dick. This is the agenda for today. We are going to discuss how we got here, why data integrity matters, what expectations exist for insurance companies, a path forward, and then we will use the remaining time for Q&A. This graph tells an interesting story about the demise or the erosion of the Death Master file. Around the time of 2011, the Death Master file was considered to be the gold standard, and it was relied upon by insurance companies to do normal death checks to find when policyholders had passed, and for other various purposes. Around that time, insurance companies were relying on this heavily. It captured almost 100% of US deaths, which is meant to be the green part of this graph on the slide. And you can see that it essentially ties out to CDC deaths, which is the Center for Disease Control. And that is the ultimate source of truth. They report every year on the number of deaths that have occurred in the US. And you can see that they were virtually the same data. Starting in 2012, you can see that the DMF records only captured about 63%, and it's been a steady decline from that point. And we've got 2024 data shown here, but the trend in 2025 continues the same way. We're just waiting for that official data to be available to us. But you can see in 2024, there were over 3 million US deaths, and about 16% of those were captured in this limited access death master file. It used to be very easy to find a deceased policyholder. If you had a name and a social security number and you checked against this file, you would be able to identify whether that policyholder had been flagged as having passed away in this file. What happened around this time in 2012, states started challenging the federal government's rights to sell what they viewed to be sensitive and potentially private data to any willing buyer. And so they successfully challenged that. The limited access version of the death master file was established. And then entities who were regularly reporting deaths to the federal government and the Social Security Administration essentially stopped doing so. And so the death master file stopped capturing all those deaths. Around the same time, the National Council of Insurance Legislators, NCOIL, established a model regulation around unclaimed life insurance benefits, dubbed the Unclaimed Life Insurance Benefits Act. It was established in 2013, but it was implemented in a very haphazard way across the 50 states. Some have a very solid now model regulation around the responsibility of life insurers to find beneficiaries once they are notified of death, and other states don't have any specific regulations. They have desk rules and other things that they use in market conduct exams, but they don't have a specific regulation that governs this. And so that's created a blind spot for the industry. And I want to now bring in the panel. Ken, from a regulator's perspective, just curious, when did you in the Connecticut Department of Insurance begin to realize that this file, the death master file, was becoming less reliable?
Sure. So I just want to say that any comments made are strictly my own and not entirely reflective of the Connecticut Insurance Department or NAIC. But I would say probably around 2013 or 2014, during market conduct exams, it was identified that the data that insurers were using was a lot less reliable than it was previously, due to the creation of the limited death master file and not having as much information reported as previously when before these privacy laws were changed in 2012, 2013.
And how did that impact your work as an examiner in that regard? What were some of the outcomes or things that you were looking for differently, or how were you thinking about this as you were examining carriers?
Sure. So our role is to make sure that insurers are meeting their obligations and doing their due diligence to meet their obligations. So when you have a source of truth like the limited death master file that was always referred to as a source of truth, that's no longer as accurate, we need to find ways that insurers are properly identifying individuals who may have had a policy or beneficiaries that may not even know that they're a beneficiary. So it really comes down to our market conduct division, ensuring that the insurer is doing everything in the best interest of the policyholder to make sure that it does meet its obligations.
Thank you, Ken. We'll come back to that notion later on in the conversation. But Dick, I want to turn to you now.
Sure.
Most consumers, you mentioned this in your opening remarks, they don't necessarily want to know how insurance works. And even many agents and advisors, we can think about this death master file and regular death checks as kind of the individual or invisible plumbing inside the machinery of the insurance industries. But why should they care about the fact that this file, which was once relied upon, is now degraded to the point where it is an untrustworthy source?
Well, at the top level, of course, they don't care because they probably don't even know it exists. but some consumers and their advisors may become affected by the deficiencies. For myself, as a 60-year member of the industry, I'm sure everyone here would hope that I've made sure that my wife and my daughters know where our policies are. They know how to contact the agents and the carriers to process claims. I've done that. But anecdotally, there are millions of beneficiaries who don't know how to file claims when an insured passes, and at least there will be a delay as they attempt to gather death certificates, obituaries, and other paperwork necessary to file claims. One of the key problems is many, if not most, individuals today don't have an actual relationship with an agent. There's a lot of online stuff. There's a lot of agents who come and go. And so when it comes down to claims time, there may not be that very valuable connection that when I came in the industry certainly existed. And we have to acknowledge that, of course, the insurance benefits are important, but beneficiaries are often overwhelmed with other issues. And these are examples of delays in receiving benefits. But there are many beneficiaries who, by definition, we can't easily quantify how many, who don't know they're beneficiaries of such things as group benefits or policies that mom and dad or even aunts and uncles may have purchased without letting beneficiaries know they are beneficiaries. So those are the issues that, as a consumer advocate, I am most concerned about.
Thank you, Dick. For both you and for Ken, I'd love your perspective on this. What happens when a death becomes known to the insurance company and they cannot find a beneficiary? You want to go first, Dick, on that?
Sure. Well, the mechanics are if they know there's a death and can't find the beneficiary after a certain period of time, often 2 years, but it's determined by the state, the proceeds are, the technical term is escheated, are paid over to the state. And then there's a certain period of time in which a claim can still be made and recovered from escheatment, but there is often a time beyond which that no longer will happen. So that's a very serious concern. I do want to make sure that we're all on the same page that the industry pays claims. Many, if not most, claims are paid. We're focused on, and it's not an insignificant number of dollars. Many claims can't be paid, again, because of that dilemma. The carrier doesn't know of the death and or the beneficiary doesn't know they're a beneficiary. So that's the process from my standpoint. Ken, you could probably give us a more technical explanation.
No, I think you nailed it, Dick. I think the insurers are making their best effort to pay the claims. But if you cannot find the beneficiary, then it has to unfold in the process that Dick laid out. But I want to reemphasize what Dick said is the insurers are paying claims. It's these specific situations where they cannot identify who the claim should be paid to that become very critical.
Thank you both for that response. Moving on just now to some of the expectations of insurance companies. What should insurers be doing? Ken, I'd love your take on this. What are regulators and the NAIC signaling about data quality and the duty to identify deceased policyholders? And it just from your perspective, what do you consider to be defensible? In an examination, what does good look like?
So I know that at the NEIC, there have been recent presentations to the A committee, which is the Life and Annuity Committee, regarding data integrity and quality of data. I think regulators as a whole understand that the quality of data is key in many aspects of not just ensuring that these policyholders are identified or beneficiaries are identified, but there's a trickle-down effect on how the quality of data can affect pricing of a product and how it can also affect policyholder behavior as well. So it is something regulators are looking into, trying to evaluate the best method forward to making sure an insurer has all the tools it needs and is doing its proper due diligence to identify a um, a potential policyholder and that the data it is using is adequate. So on our market conduct exams, the examiner will evaluate a insurance company's procedures that are in place to identify the policyholder or the beneficiary. Um, it's a I don't want to say there's a one case fits all situation. Each company is a little bit different, but it really comes down to, is the company making a honest effort to identify the person and meet its obligation?
And I know historically, going back, maybe 10 years or so, there was some evidence of asymmetric use or asymmetric attempts. Are you seeing any of that today? Any moral hazards created by different contract types, life or annuity, with how quickly insurers are looking to identify deceased policyholders for whatever benefit or reason?
I wouldn't say moral hazards. I think like back to what Dick said before, these insurers are trying to pay the claims. I so I think it's important that the insurer doesn't rush to brush it off, but I think we need to see that they're putting their full effort into making sure that the claim is paid.
And Dick, from a fiduciary or good faith standpoint, periodic searches, secondary verification, documentation of unclaimed benefits framework, what's the standard insurers should hold themselves to beyond the regulatory minimum that is outlined either by the state or in the model regulations?
I'd like to answer that as completely as possible and kind of end with your question as a conclusion. I really want to emphasize, why is this so important? And I was fascinated a couple of years ago by a poll that the Federal Reserve had conducted. They actually do annual or semi or biannual polls of a cross section of Americans, and discovered that almost 50% of respondents would have difficulty raising just $400 in cash if needed immediately. And take that and imagine the costs that are incurred by a family losing income contributions to the family's lifestyle by a recent decedent, which, based on today's median family income of almost $7,000 a month, can quickly reduce a family to near poverty levels, even if the surviving spouse continues to work. From my time as an insurance agent, death benefits are primarily sold and purchased to help replace income in the case of premature death. Life insurance primarily exists in workplace benefit plans. It's actually estimated that 1/3 of working parents only have group life insurance through work. That's a higher number than I would have thought. And of course, there's individually owned term and cash value insurance. But LIMRA indicates that the average family coverage is less than $210,000, when the typical recommendation is to have as much as 10 times annual income to cover debt repayment, immediate expenses following death, and of course, replacing income to cover ongoing family expenses. So with those brief statistics, my answer to your question, the carrier's duty is to pay the insured benefits as quickly as possible. And as Ken has said, and in my own observation, I think most companies want to pay the claims. The problem is what happens when you don't have the information that inspires you to know or to continue through the process of paying the claim. So this mostly happens year after year in both life and annuity payments. In fact, I had read recently that life and annuity benefit payments are second only to Social Security benefit payments but we can't be satisfied until all benefits payable to beneficiaries are discovered and paid.
That's fascinating. And Ken referenced the presentation to the A committee, which you were the one who made. What were some of the questions that came out of that conversation, and what do you think might happen next?
The questions were understandably, so give us the numbers. How many people? How many dollars? And it's very frustrating because of the very nature of the problem. We really can't quantify it, even when the very valid question came up. So if we looked at it from the standpoint of how much is escheated from the insurance company to the respective states, could that give us any information? Unfortunately, that information is not gathered in a very cohesive way, if at all. And so we're working with anecdotes here. We know that there's a substantial amount of money, a substantial number of people who are not being connected to benefits to which they're entitled. And that's what we're trying to address here.
Yeah, it's interesting that there is not a national repository for escheatment, and there is not a regulatory standard to capture that information in the annual reportings to the NAIC. So
Right.
It is a little bit of a blind spot. We have an interesting perspective on that. One of the ways that we engage with customers is to audit their files for potential deaths that may have been unreported or unidentified. And it's not uncommon for us the first time we do a sweep through to find a high percentage of deaths relative to the size of the population that are 9 months or older, in some cases even years and older. And so it's certainly evidence of the machinery failing the industry and then ultimately failing the consumer. And I think that's a good segue then to, what is the path forward? I love your perspective, Dick, on, what is the state of the art? What is the state of the industry, or what kind of standard should insurance companies hold themselves to if the reliance and the regulatory threshold is simply the limited access death master file, which we know now is no longer adequate? What should insurers be doing? And then maybe, Ken, if you could comment on what you're seeing from an examination standpoint. What is the state of the art, or what does great look like?
Well, Lynn, I can certainly tell you what, as a consumer rep, in that I've now given several presentations to the NAIC as a consumer rep on these issues. Here's what we've asked the NAIC to consider, which is a model act that would at least accomplish the following. First is continuing to access the LADMF for whatever it's worth, but going well beyond that in resources that can determine insured deaths and connecting that information to pay beneficiaries, as we've been discussing. Among other things, we've suggested that the NAIC should gather data from sources that sell vital record data and make it available to all states. We've suggested that they require standardization validation protocols with evidence that all sources have been tapped, to establish consistent annual metrics, to tighten the time frame to just 60 days for locating beneficiaries and paying benefits, and require carriers to document searches of all sources and to perform this monthly. The good news, and I think you've already referenced it briefly, is that there is a model act from the National Council of Insurance Legislators, that's NCOIL, and it's the Unclaimed Life Insurance Benefits Act, ULIBA. We're an industry that absolutely loves acronyms.
Yes, we do.
And ULIBA is followed to some degree in half the states to hasten discovery of deaths and to process the resulting claims. That's the good news. But state by state implementation, as I think, Lane, you've already suggested, is varied and inconsistent. And I think our attendees today would agree that it's not acceptable that some difficult to track claims are handled better than others based on where you live.
Yeah,
And how does it look
really
from your standpoint?
Yeah, it's unfair and unfortunate. Absolutely. Ken, what's your take on that?
I would totally agree. I think there needs to be consistency amongst the states. It the ability for a beneficiary to receive their benefit shouldn't be related to what state you're in. I think it's important for insurers to, in addition to just using the death master, the limited access death master file, there's other methods they can use to identify a potential policyholder who was deceased, doing obituary or public record searches, if they're receiving returned mail from when they're paying their premium or when they're sending notice out for premium payments. And then I think more consumer advocacy. I think Dick made a really good point earlier where he was discussing that beneficiaries, they just don't even know that they might be a beneficiary. So how can we get the word out there to potential beneficiaries where so they understand where they go if somebody in their family did pass away and they're interested in trying to find out if that person may have had a policy. But it all comes down to consistency. I think there needs to be consistency amongst the states through adoption of a model act. The one that NCOIL put out years ago, I think, was a good starting point. Unfortunately, it was adopted on state by state basis in only about half the states, and it also references the limited access death master file, which we found to be not as accurate as it originally was or intended to be. So I think, as the quality of data kind of erodes over time, I think it's important that insurers and regulators come to find ways to, it's clearly a problem, and so they need to collectively come together to find a solution.
Yeah, that's great. And while I promise this wouldn't be a commercial for Berwyn, I do think it's an opportunity for me to mention that this gap that's been identified and the different mechanisms for identifying death, which were once solely relying upon the death master file, but now include state vital records where they're available, which is not universal. It's complemented by a much more laborious process of combing through thousands and thousands of obituaries to triangulate and validate a death. And the Berwyn Group has recently launched and announced, and I'm sure most of you on the call have seen a press release around this, the Berwyn DMF, which, contrasting with the limited access death master file from the Social Security Administration, will capture over 70% of deaths within 5 to 7 days of that occurrence. So it was built specifically to close that gap. And we're happy to be rolling that out right now. That for us is an important part of the path forward, is just making more resources available to insurers and recognizing that data quality, data consistency, data availability are inherently challenging in the life insurance industry because, as you mentioned earlier, Dick, the relationship between the policyholder and the insurance company may be unknown. It may go over decades, and there's a lot that can happen through that period of time. And then, of course, if the beneficiary is unaware that the benefit exists, it can be incredibly difficult for the beneficiary to be united with the benefit, even though the insurer may want to do everything possible to make sure that happens.
We assume that, yes.
Do you have any sense, Dick, for what might happen from this point forward based on the reaction that you got from your presentation?
I think right now the main consideration is who's got the ball. My presentation was to the A committee, which of course handles both life and annuities. And I don't think there's been a consideration yet of whether this rests with the A committee or perhaps the D committee. So first we got to figure out where the responsibility lies to be digging into this and coming up with a model regulation. I don't think that there's no one on these committees who disputes the problem. Again, many, if not most benefits are paid. We're talking about the benefits that can't be paid. And to that extent, I don't think there's any disagreement. We got to pay those
Yeah.
those benefits. The question at the moment is, so who's going to take point on taking responsibility and developing a model act?
Yeah, and I would imagine it's super helpful to whoever is making those decisions and thinking about this, that you have laid out some very tangible, practical steps that can be taken to try to shore this up.
Yes.
I'd love now at this point to see if we've got any questions from the audience.
Lane, it looks like there's somebody with their hand up.
Okay, I am not able to see that. Let me see if I can figure out who that might be. Pete Fisher. He needs to enter the question in the chat. Pete, if you've got a question, is it possible for you to type it in? I'd love to see it.
Lane, while we're working on getting the question, I think I just want to go back to one point. I think ultimately the insurer they are responsible for, coming up with a reasonable method to meet their obligations.
Yes.
So the insurer can do this by enhancing their compliance divisions, implementing new procedures to identify potentially deceased or individuals or their beneficiaries. And I think we live in a world with rapidly evolving technology. So I think there could be a lot of solutions that could develop technology-wise that insurers will be able to adapt or adopt and use as well. But it's really the responsibility of the insurer. And then the main thing is consistency amongst the states on what the regulation and requirements are for at least declaring a sort of benchmark that insurers have to achieve to or baseline they should have to achieve to identify a deceased policyholder.
And I agree. And I would offer, while we're waiting for comments, at a very practical level, the DMF, when it was effective, was developed by the Social Security Administration so it could track deaths and terminate those monthly Social Security checks. It was very
Right.
practical, making sure we're not paying beneficiaries who are no longer alive. Insurance companies who sell annuities, and many, if not most, life insurance companies sell both life and annuities. The annuity department has a consideration almost as strong as the Social Security Administration to stop annuity checks for those annuitants who have deceased. Very practical. At a practical level, to the extent possible, the life departments need to be connecting more specifically with the annuity departments and using the data they've collected. Now, they may not have as good data, especially as the limited access DMF has degraded. But my suspicion is the annuity departments have found alternative ways, whether it's Berwyn Group or anybody else, to account for these deaths. And so from a practical standpoint, hopefully the life departments can start talking to the annuity departments.
Yeah, that's a great point. We do have the question now, and it relates to deaths that occur outside of the country. What sort of impact might that have on death searches and then the ability to pay claims? And Ken, I don't know if you've got a perspective on that, or if you do, Dick, but from our vantage point, it gets more complicated. Obviously, if you're in a different country, there are different privacy laws. And so the ability to access information from sources that might be able to confirm or validate a death vary considerably from country to country. And then, the tools that we've built at the Berwyn Group are really based on obituaries and US-based data that may not be available in other countries. But I wonder if you've seen any nuances there, Dick or Ken, that might be relevant to answer that question.
I'll let Ken go first.
I unfortunately do not. I know anything. You laid it out perfectly. When different privacy laws come into effect, a whole host of other variables for getting the information that I'm not personally as familiar with. So I'm going to hand it over to Dick for his opinion on this one.
Well, I have a very personal perspective. I'm turning 80 this year, and we are taking our family abroad for a family gathering to celebrate. And that's one of the things that has occurred to me. What happens if I die while I am outside the country? And I actually don't know what my insurance carriers are prepared to do. I know that, again, being part of the industry for so long, I know that my family will notify the agent. The agent, in turn, will notify the carrier. The question then is, what is the carrier going to require? Typically a death certificate, typically an obituary, or some other public statement. How does that work in Portugal, where we'll be? So you've inspired for me. I write a lot of articles within the industry. I think I'm going to start talking to some carriers, get some consensus of best practices, and we'll start publishing that information. People who travel, what should they have in their back pocket when it comes to, if I die during this trip, what's going to happen?
Yes, it's a really interesting question that everybody should be contemplating. Ben, I find it fascinating, having grown up in the industry as you have, not quite 6 decades in yet, but someday maybe. We're probably on the leading edge of planning, so to speak, for our families and making sure they're aware of who to contact, how to contact, and what to have on hand when the inevitable occurs. But so many people are unprepared for that, and it just creates an unfortunate gap. And insurance companies may not have good reason to stay in close communication with their policyholder, and data over time decays. People move, people get divorced, beneficiaries pass away, as well as the policyholders. And so it's an enormous challenge for insurance companies to keep track of all of that. We got another question that is a practical one. Can this recording be made available? And the answer is yes. And let me see if I can tell you how and when that's going to be. It'll be sent out to those who registered. So we have your email address because you registered for this webinar. We will email you a recording of the call in about 24 hours. So you can all expect to see that. And please feel free to share it with your colleagues and anybody else who you might think is interested in this information. If we don't have any other questions, I don't want to unnecessarily take up any more of your time, Dick or Ken. I really appreciate you.
Oh, go ahead. Lane, it would be nice if we did have some more questions. I thought I would share very briefly in preparing for this discussion we're going to have this morning. I did some research and came up with some interesting numbers. And it sources from the issue that Americans pay significant amounts of premiums for the coverage they need. Forbes had reported that total individual life premiums, which does not cover the larger component of groups, so we're just talking about individual policies, term, whole life, universal life, etc., $16.2 billion in premiums in 2024. Another interesting fact, State Farm, which depending on the year sells more term life insurance than any other carrier, It alone reported $6.9 billion in premium income for 2025, with $1.2 trillion of individual life insurance in force. Across America, according to AM Best, there was more than 62 trillion. That's billion with a T, trillion in total life insurance coverage in force in 2025. From more than 134 million individual policies, plus approximately 118 million group life coverage. And the point in those statistics, there were a lot of numbers, I tried to condense it down, is that consumers are entitled to know their beneficiaries will be paid valid claims as expeditiously as possible. The industry does pay out a lot of money each year in valid benefits, but it can't pay benefit for claims that haven't been made, either because the carrier doesn't know the death has occurred and or the beneficiary doesn't know they're entitled to those benefits. We've all said that over and over today, but I think it's really important to connect the dots of we're spending a lot of money to cover our families in the event of premature death or any of the other many reasons why people buy life insurance, have coverage through group coverage, and have the expectation without it necessarily even being conscious. We naturally have the expectation those benefits are going to be paid when the piper needs to be paid. And by and large, they are, but what we're talking about is those that currently can't be for all the reasons that we've talked about.
Yeah, it's so true, and it's a great point. I appreciate you raising those data points, and it kind of ties back to what the comment I made in the beginning of this. It's there's an expectation and there's a duty to perform. The insurance companies, there's an expectation for the people paying those premiums that their loved ones will be taken care of. And there's a larger societal issue. Trillions of dollars will change hands, and the machinery that makes this happen is challenged. And we're all kind of depending, and certainly the next generation is depending on the successful and seamless transition of those assets so they can continue operating for the greater economy and the greater good. And so there's a lot of work to do to make sure that happens. Ken, do you have any final thoughts that you'd like to add?
Just echo everything that Dick said. There's a lot of money being moved through the life insurance industry, and ultimately the insurer needs to make reasonable efforts to identify the deceased and pay those claims. And I also just agree that the consistency amongst how states set up their requirements for policyholders or for insurers to identify policyholders. I think there needs to be it needs to be relooked at, I should say, I guess. The erosion of the data that everybody relied on previously is clear. So new solutions need to be developed.
And I like Ken's point earlier about technology. The DMF started to degrade as of 2010, 2011. That's 15 years ago. Think of how much technology has changed in just those number of years. We can do it. We need some model acts to make sure we're all doing it the same way, but we can do it.
Yeah, I totally agree. And maybe for a future conversation, we can talk about the potential taxation of all those benefits. It always seems to be an interesting topic as well. Well, I really appreciate your time, Dick, and your time, Ken. Thank you so much for joining us. Thanks to all of you who dialed in for this. We will circulate the call itself so you have this recording, and we very much appreciate your time as well. You have contact information now on the screen for myself, for Dick, and for Ken. If any of you have questions about the contents of this presentation or want to further the discussion, please feel free to reach out to us. We look forward to that. Thank you all very much and have a great day.
Good being part of this.
Thank you so much.